Every week we do a Q&A with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community to find how they persevered, how they innovated, how they built communities, and how they found solutions. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast. Today we have Chuck Aoki, who is a three-time Paralympic medalist. He is the captain of the wheelchair rugby team, headed to the World Championships, I believe, in October. He is also a candidate for PhD in International Relations and Comparative Politics. This is a man who does a lot of things and does a lot of things really well. Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Chris, it is my pleasure to be here and to be with a legend like yourself. This is quite an honor for me. So you're very kind, and yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is absolutely awesome. I have watched you play and watched wheelchair rugby. I've watched Murder Ball, which I understand was the thing that hooked you, the documentary film that hooked you. Can you describe what's happening on the court? And then also like how similar this is to rugby. You guys are called rugby as well.
Yeah, two great questions. So the first one, the way I always describe wheelchair rugby is it's high-speed chess. It's bumper cars, but it's chess. In that when you first see it, you see crashing and the smashing and tipping over, wheels falling off, people flying everywhere. And that's what kept people's attention right away. And that's what caught my attention right away was, wow, this looks like a lot of fun. You referenced Murder Ball. I was like a 15-year-old boy when I saw that movie. And so, of course, I was like, yes, this is what I want to be a part of.
I don't know as a 15-year-old boy that you should have been allowed to see that movie.
Well, there was some back and forth, but my mom was like, "No, we'll go do it. We'll go check it out." So we went and saw it. Yeah, so I saw it and just instantly hooked me. And it, like I said, the physicality, the knocking around was fun. But what you really find out more about the sport, and what I've really come to love about it as I've gotten into it, is there's actually a ton of strategy that goes into it. In terms of classification, in terms of what we're actually doing on the court, defensive, offensive. There's a ton of strategy that you have to keep in your head while you're getting knocked into and smacked around, which, is really, I think what makes it such an interesting and exciting sport to get to be a part of. And a reason I love it, I can certainly talk more and more about that, but that's really the quick two is just that it's this physical, intense sport, but with an incredible depth of strategy that, I could literally talk about for days about. So maybe I won't do that tonight. But and then your second question about rugby, we're actually not all that similar to able-bodied rugby in a lot of ways. The main similarity I always say is that much like in able-bodied rugby, we have to carry the ball and we score. Like football, you go in the end zone, you can catch it or something. We have to carry the ball across, which is just like in rugby, they have to carry the ball across. The main reason it's called wheelchair rugby, though, is of course movie Murder. It was called Murder Ball originally, and very popular name. But as it became more, official and part of the Paralympics, I think the decisions were said, you know what, we should probably find a different name for this than Murder Ball. If we want to be in the Paralympics, we got to call it something else. And so rugby kind of came to that because the nature of it, the physicality of it, it has that kind of, it has the very much all the physicality happens on the court. So off the court, everybody's friends, you have a good time, you have some beers, it has that kind of camaraderie to it that I think we get because, like I said, you if you want to take something out on your opponent, you get to go do it right there on the court. You don't have to hold back. And so I think it creates a nice bond among all of us athletes who some would say are crazy enough to play the sport.
I love it. That some really are crazy enough to play the sport, but it's so quadriplegics or sort of a quadriplegic equivalent, meaning affected in 4 limbs and hands or whatever. But I mean, some of what I was asking is, we have to describe a little bit of the chairs too, right? So what are the chairs like? Because I've got this Mad Max version of what they are.
I always point people to Mad Max as the first thing. It's just this heavy armored chair. So if you've ever seen a sports chair, they're larger, they've got kind of rims, they've got a bumper and such. But the wheelchair rugby chair is basically, I say it's built for combat. It is built to get smacked and to smack back. It's meant to hit. And so it's heavily armored. It's got wings that protect you from other players. Actually, I should mention that there are actually two styles of chairs. I think it's really another really interesting element of the game. We have what we call offensive chairs. We have what we call defensive chairs. And so the offensive chairs are used by players who have, we call it more function. So higher ability level, they have some core function, they've got better hand function, versus the defensive chairs, which are used by low point players, Those are people with less function, usually higher spinal cord injuries, or really, really severe levels of amputation or something like that, or cerebral palsy and such. And so the defensive chairs are designed to stop the offensive chairs, which is another really cool element to it. They've got essentially these little cages on the front that are designed to hook onto the offensive chairs and essentially try to stop you from going anywhere, whether it's on offense or defense. And so there's really a lot of interesting elements that come into play with that. But yeah, at the core of the chairs are just little battle machines. They're built to get knocked around. They're built to beat up. They're built to go flying and be able to get right back up. Of course, we end up having to replace them pretty frequently at the international level. I think I go through a chair every couple of years, which is it's pretty frequent, but they take quite a pounding. They take quite a beating. But that's, once again, it's why we love it so much. It's so physical. It's so intense.
And you're saying some of the defensive players are some of the players with less function. I mean, you have some players who do not have a significant amount of function. I mean, some of these players who are sort of teetering on that line of like power chair, manual chair kind of thing almost, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's what makes wheelchair rugby such an incredible sport, is that we have such a wide variety of functional levels that are built into it. I don't know if folks, Chris, I know you're familiar with classification. I don't know if folks watching are so much, every Paralympic sport has some way of, leveling the playing field, essentially, and finding ways to assign new values. And wheelchair rugby's does that by, essentially assigning these point values that range from 0.5, which are our least functional players, to your point, folks who are really close to maybe needing to use a power chair thing, all the way up to 3.5 players who have a lot of function. Some of them are amputees who actually can walk on prosthetics and things like that. And so, we have that really wide range, but it's such a great sport because with the classification system, if you want to play a high functioning player, that's great. You have to play a lower functioning player to go with it. There has to be that balance, which I think is really cool. And, the analogy I use to describe it to folks who maybe don't know about this as much as I say, look, if you've ever imagined in the NBA, you could have a 7-foot tall player, but you got to have a guy under 5'6". And people who are shorter are always like, oh, that sounds amazing. I would have made the NBA. But it's kind of true, right? It's like, if you're going to have this one person with this physical ability, you have to match it with a different physical ability. And it's really, like you said, it's a really cool part. I think what's amazing is it's able to give people who often think they couldn't play a sport activity. It's like, no, you can play the sport. There's a role for you in this sport. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not as fast as those guys. Like, you don't have to be as fast as those guys. You just have to be as fast as the people who are like you. And I think that's just a really cool element to the sport that makes it so special and makes it so unique in a lot of ways, because it gives this opportunity for people up and down the functional level system who, like I said, maybe think they can't compete in something like wheelchair basketball or, I don't know, track and field or something like that.
But that's the strategy. And what you're saying is it's really a team strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Where the higher point, the more functioning athletes are looking effectively for like an opening, but the lower functioning athletes are effectively creating, and in some ways, this is what I looked at and why I was asking about how similar is it to rugby, where it's sort of like that scrum, where there is, everybody's together and they're kind of locked in together, and it's almost puzzle pieces. Everybody's stuck together, and then somebody is able to get out and get a breakaway or whatever, because you have a lot of breakaway points.
Yeah.
And so the strategy, is that coming from the coach? Is this something in practice? Is this, we're running play number 1, we're running play number 717? Right. How does that work?
Yeah, so it really, it starts actually, this whole strategy you're talking about, it really starts at team selection. When our coach is picking the team, we have athletes at all function levels in the country, and when the coach picks a team, he has to sit down and say, okay, what do we want to have our team be? We know what the other countries have. A lot of other countries run what we call high-low lineups. They have lots of high-function players and lots of low-function players, and very few players in the middle. We try to actually do a little bit of that, but also have what we call a balanced lineup, where we have high-function player, 2 middle-function player, and 1 very low-function player. And so this is kind of, it really begins at team selections. Like, what do you want your team to look like? To your point, do you want to have a bunch of big burly guys all in one? Do you want to have some little guys who are fast with some big guys who are slow? It's kind of finding that balance. And so it starts at that point, and then the strategy evolves beyond that based on what we put on the court. It's like, and sometimes we as a team don't really have set plays. We more have set strategies. Like, this is how we want our offense to operate. We want to run it through this player. And if it doesn't work for that player, we go to sort of plan B or plan C. But we have fewer plays in the sort of our up and down game, because to your point, right, it's a lot of block, and then boom, someone gets out. We have ways we like to do that. I probably shouldn't divulge too many secrets tonight or anything, Chris, but yeah, we certainly have a strategy for how we want to get those players open, like you said, because our sport is mostly offensive based. I actually compare it in some ways to tennis. It's like you're expected to score the points. It's actually when you don't score when it's kind of a problem. So we really try hard to find ways to maximize our offensive capabilities. And it's a good point about the scrum too. It's like we have our guys who go in there and are just in the muck all game long and are just battling through the trenches and have to just kind of scrape and fight their way through to make people like myself look good. I owe quite a bit to my low pointers, I like to say.
So are you like a quarterback? Are you buying Rolexes for all the guys who are making the scrum there, or how does that work?
Maybe Timexes. I don't know if my bankroll is quite to the Rolex level, but I certainly can get them some waterproof watches sometime. I'd be happy to do that. No, but it's true though. I often compare them to offensive linemen. It's like I end up with the ball a lot, and so I do end up doing a lot of the scoring. But it happens because we have a team that functions well. It's a 4-on-4 game. I can't play 1-on-4. I can't even play 3-on-4. We have to be able to play 4-on-4 and be able to have really good matchups up and down the board. It's like I said, why our strategy as a team has always been to build really balanced teams and not sort of top heavy teams. We want to be able to create mismatches with these other countries that, like I said, like to run kind of more uneven lineups. We like to have a little more balance in our lineup and try to attack that way.
So you can create more mismatches within the trenches that then allow you to score. And yeah, scoring, I mean, you're talking about, and we'll get to this, I'll just tease it right now, but it was 54-49 in the gold medal game in Tokyo against Great Britain. So it is, I mean, it's kind of like basketball in that sense, where it's like you come down, you score, you go back, you score, but the defense and trying to establish that defense, what can you do defensively to unbalance that scoring? Because sometimes it looks like it's relatively easy to score because it's not soccer, right? It's not 0-0. It's not 1-0.
Yeah, no, it's a high scoring game for sure. And we should know we score by 1 point at a time too. So it's not like we're racking up 6 or 7 points at a time. You're getting it one at a time to get to these 50 margins. There's a lot of things we try to do defensively. I think a big part of our sport is, like I said, it's the physicality. And so it's finding ways to put the other team's players under pressure, like a lot of pressure, heavy pressure, really selling out on putting guys in bad spots where they can't make passes, where they have trouble, their backs are turned and things like that. You referenced that everyone in our sport has some type of impairment in all 4 limbs. And so most people like spinal cord injuries, but other times, like I said, it's amputees. So folks quite literally don't have hands. And so those are often faster, more functional players, but they can't pass as well. So it's like, okay, we're going to try to put our really big guys on that guy and pressure him. And so that he can't get the pass out, or it's a very difficult pass at least. And so the strategy is, like I said, it's really finding ways to put people in really tough positions to struggle. And, the result, I'll admit, sometimes is it looks like, oh my God, they scored so easily. But to your point, you score a lot anyway. So it's more like, can we take advantage of the opportunities when they exist to really attack them in moments? And I think the other part of our sport is that we do a lot of pressing. And so most of the game, we'd say press. We're in the front court, we're really trying to stop them. But we also have a sort of key area, which is similar to basketball, where you kind of play almost a zone type defense that's right in front of the goal. And we pride ourselves on being really good at that as well. And so we try to have we have a 2-layer defense. We press, and then if they get free, we all try to run back so we can have another chance at playing. We call it key defense. And that's something in the US we really try to be really good at and be able to force turnovers off of, because it's a much more contained space, rather than having the whole court to work with.
Right. So it's like your goal line defense, and you said run back, but running back, you guys are all in wheelchairs, not to confuse anything.
Yeah. Push back.
But exactly. And I'd imagine that some of it is a strategy that you're building throughout the game, where it's like, okay, we're playing them this way, but we also know that we can employ this tactic
Yeah.
at some point when it's really critical. Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, this isn't like professional NBA or MLB where you're playing, 80 games a year, 100 games a year. We play the top teams twice a year if we're lucky. Sometimes maybe a little bit more. And so, we watch a lot of film and we try to understand teams' tendencies. But yeah, we try to enter into every game, I would say, with, we have our main strategy, but we have at least 2 or 3 things that, first quarter ends, we come to the huddle and coach is like, all right, this isn't working. Let's switch to this. It's like, okay, let's try this, and then we can always go back to the other strategy. But it's one of these things where since we don't play each other that often, there's big gaps between what you play. So you play a game and it goes one way. We come back and say, okay, our strategy, we like what we did here. We think, and let's say we did really well defensively. We're going to say to ourselves, okay, are they going to change or are they just going to try to do it better? And so you almost get in your own head a little bit, like it's the 4D chess. It's like, well, if I move, they don't move. It's a Princess Bride thing, where you can get too deep into the layers sometimes. But yeah, I think the key is really having, I think it's true of all sports, is really having a solid strategy that you believe in, kind of irrespective of the team you're playing against. And then you have principles that you try to hold to, like I said, being really aggressive, attacking the ball carriers. And as long as you do that successfully, it's less relevant the teams you play, although you obviously make tweaks depending on what other teams have.
Exactly. So you have your general structure, and then you're kind of going to tweak it out of that. When you see another player, how accurate is your assessment of that other player in terms of like their strengths and their vulnerabilities? Because this is exactly, you have their strengths, their vulnerabilities, you have your strengths, your vulnerabilities, and then you have team strengths, team vulnerabilities for each group.
I would say, I think at this point, all the top countries really know each other pretty well. I've been on the national team since 2009, so I've been playing for quite a long time. And there have been some athletes who have retired at the top level, but a lot of the people who when I first started, or at least from the first Paralympics I went to, are still around, or most of them are. There have been a few new players come in certainly along the way, but there's a lot of athletes that we're very familiar with each other. And so I think we really know each other's strengths pretty well. And I think, like you said, we know each other's weaknesses pretty well. And so it's really, and a lot of times it's that progression of what's the next strategy you can come up with to attack them. For example, we came into, beyond being very frank, we came into Tokyo not thinking we would play Great Britain when it came to the final. We really didn't think that would happen. And so when we ended up against them, it was a little like, oh, this team, like we didn't realize we'd play this team. They've come on really in the last 3 or 4 years as a real big threat. Obviously, they're both medalists. And so we certainly work really hard to kind of come up with strategies to go against them. But like you said, with individual players, some of these guys have played against for a decade, and so it's like, what more is there to learn against each other? But as an athlete, I'm always, I always trying to improve, never staying still, because I think that's so critical to staying on top. If you get stagnant, that's when somebody catches you and passes you. Because I'm 31 now, Chris. I'm getting up there in my career, and so it's like I have to try to make sure I can stay relevant, at least through Paris, hopefully.
Well, which is interesting that you talk about it as a chess match as well, because you have the physical part, but then you are gaining more and more knowledge, and your vision of the game, I'm sure, is continuing to improve. You talked a little bit about like Great Britain coming in and winning the gold medal in Tokyo. You're probably looking more at Australia, who is the previous gold medalist, but they ended up losing in the bronze medal game, right? And ended up in 4th place. How much of that cycling do you see? Because you guys have gone bronze, silver, silver in the last 3 games, your last 3 games. How much of that cycling do you see with the teams?
In terms of kind of new teams sort of coming on the rise, and
somebody coming on the rise, somebody else sort of cycling out? Is it dependent upon an individual, or is it just if you're the biggest team, if you're the gold medal team, that people are all gunning for you and they base their strategy on you?
Right. Yeah, I think that I would say for the first couple of games of my career, we actually didn't see a ton of change, which is kind of unfortunate. I actually thought it wasn't so good for the sport to have essentially, I think the same 3 teams were on the podium from 2010 through 2018, no, 2016, I'm sorry, 2018, we finally had a new one. And it's just not the best thing for the sport to have everybody saying. Obviously, we were successful, so it wasn't like I was upset about it. But, in the last 4 years, we've really seen a dramatic change in the depth of sport. Japan was the world champion for 2018, and that was a massive shift for them. They were bronze medalists, I think, the year before. And so that was a huge one. And then Great Britain came in and was gold medalist at the Paralympic Games. And so we haven't seen it as much, kind of the US has always been strong. Canada has always been a very strong team, and Australia's been strong, but we're starting to see more European teams come up, which is really fantastic. France has become a very strong team kind of all of a sudden, which is, like I said, it's really good for the sport. But it often is driven by a player. Australia, I would say, had the best player in the world for a very long time. He very may well still be. His name's Riley Bat. He may still be the best player in the world. I haven't seen him for a while, but their team unfortunately came down a little bit in Tokyo, and I think that's what did them in, because he was phenomenal. He drove their success through both London and Rio, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to see that team dynamic and how it ends up working out. You started, though, as a basketball player. You didn't start so wheelchair basketball, similar kind of thing where you have the camber in the wheels, but there are fouls, where basketball fouls for you are hits, are just part of the game.
Yeah, no, I grew up, wheelchair basketball was the first really adapted sport I ever played. I very rare genetic condition that I grew up with. And so when I was about 6, my mom was like, okay, clearly something's not quite right with you. And so had to start using the wheelchair. And that's when we found basketball.
Hold on, back up 1 second. What exact event brought her to this point that there's something that's not quite right with you?
So there were 2 events that kind of did this, I'll say. So the first one was I was probably 3 or 4, a little kid. And she came in the morning to wake me up, and my wall was covered in blood. And she was just like, oh God, what's wrong with it? And she woke me up and like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine, Mom. And she's like, what? Like, what happened? And it turned out, I don't remember this as a kid. I wanted to know what was under my fingernail. And so I picked it off. I pulled it off as a kid. And this is, yeah, I know. I'm sorry to horrify the audience on a Wednesday
night. This is one that we all feel. Yeah.
Y'all feel it. I don't feel it. And so that was the first sign. Okay, something's very different with this kid. And so they took me to the doctors and kind of figured out I probably had some sort of rare genetic condition, because I quite literally didn't feel it. It didn't hurt. But it wasn't until I was 6. I was walking most of this time. But I walked really slowly and kind of weird. When I was 6, though, I broke my femur, and they didn't actually figure it out until a few weeks after, when my leg was like extremely swollen. I think I had a hematoma. I can't remember exactly what happened, but essentially it was like, okay, something is very different here. And so, yeah, it turned out I had broken my femur, and I'd been walking on it because I couldn't feel it. I didn't know it. And so that's what led them to say, okay, something is clearly very different here. And I was taken to the Mayo Clinic. I'm from Minnesota, so luckily we had, a phenomenal hospital like that right down the road from us, where I was diagnosed with what's called hereditary sensory autonomic neuropathy type 2, which I expect you to have memorized now. Chris, you're a professional. You should have it locked down.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, I have no sensation from my elbows down and my knees down. I feel absolutely nothing. And that led to a lot of injuries when I was younger, that I've been losing parts of my fingers. My legs have been pretty damaged as a result of that. But it led me to wheelchair sports, which is what I always say is the silver lining to all this. And so as a kid, I was really active. I loved sports. I loved baseball. I loved football. But when I was essentially getting injured, my parents were like, all right, able-bodied sports really aren't going to work for you, but we're going to find something that is going to work for you. And so we showed up to wheelchair basketball, and I loved wheelchair basketball. I still love playing basketball just for fun, sometimes for pickup. But it was the first sport I really got into a sports chair and was like, whoa, this is for real. Like this is really cool.
This is your sports car kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll never forget it. And I actually was looking back in your past episodes, and I saw you had Paul Schulte on. And Paul was the first Paralympian I ever met. I don't know if I've ever told him this, but I was like, 10, 11, I can't remember, but he was my counselor at a wheelchair basketball camp in Whitewater, Wisconsin. And watching him was just like, oh my God, this guy is unbelievable. He's so fast, he can push, he can shoot. It was really my first eye open to like, whoa, there are like, these guys are real athletes, like they're elite, they're incredible, and so it was just, I was just in awe of it. It was just this cool, and he was such a nice guy, so helpful, so positive, just a great role model. And so and so like I said, that was my first exposure to Paralympic sport. I was like, this is amazing. Like I want to be like these guys, this is awesome. It wasn't meant to be in basketball because I'm pretty quick. I've got good chair skills, pretty fast, solid defender, but I can't shoot to save my life. Terrible at shooting, absolutely horrendous at shooting. And apparently in basketball, they like you to be good at shooting. So rugby eliminated the one thing I was really bad at. It worked out pretty well.
Which is also interesting, right? Because in basketball, you would be on the less functional side.
Absolutely.
And so you would be more of a picker in basketball. Like
I was, yeah.
Chuck, go get in the way, and we're going to free it up for the Paul Schultes.
Oh yeah.
Or those kinds of things. You're going to gain some space. Whereas in wheelchair rugby, it's exactly the opposite. You are the Paul Schulte. You are the speed guy. You're living your dream, right? You're catching up to your hero. What was that? Was it that transition that captivated you with rugby, or was it I read something about you being like, this skinny little kid and getting knocked into the bleachers and going,
oh,
yeah, this is what I'm all about. So was it being more functional, or was it getting knocked into the bleachers that attracted you, or was it both?
It was probably both to a certain extent. I think that I loved the physicality from the moment I did it. I always tell people that when we have new athletes come, you can tell within about the first 2 minutes if they're going to like it, because the first time they get hit, they either kind of like back off and are a little unsure, which is fine. It's not for everybody. But then there's people who get hit and their eyes light up and they run right back into you. And those are the folks. And I was in that category of yes, I'm going to run right back into you. So I love the physicality. The physicality was just amazing. It was like you said, it felt freeing. I grew up in Minnesota. I loved hockey. I loved football. I like contact sports. So I think I really felt free in some ways to just go out and get to knock people around. But it also is it's fun. It was fun being the lead ball handler. It's fun getting to do that. And I think the main thing though is my background in basketball really gave me appreciation though for what the low pointers have to do. Like you said, I was that guy. I was the one who had to be down there and grinding it out, setting picks, just guarding people, getting knocked around, getting dominated. I think I have an appreciation for that, and I think it's helped me be successful in the sport. Is that I really have a good understanding of all the different roles on the court because I've had to play all those lower roles, and then it was like, came to rugby, it was like, all right, here you go, here's the ball. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do this one now, but I do think having that background has been really helpful for me as an athlete and really brought me, like you said, it gave me just a different perspective on the game, which I think I hope has been helpful.
It's interesting painting a picture of you, right? Because we're getting a picture of the guy who won, who tore his fingernail off, who walked on a femur that was broken, and I broke my femur at one point, and I have a similar pain block, and went into the hospital and told the nurse I've broken my femur, and she said, well, we'll take some x-rays and we'll look at that. I was like, no, I have a pretty decent idea. Like, and it's not because of pain, it was because I could see it. I mean, I didn't have any muscle around it, so I could actually see. I was like, I think this guy's broken, and she didn't understand. She came back and she said, "Your femur's broken." I said, "Yes, I know. I told you that my femur was broken, but having that pain block, it's something that, yeah, you're not getting that same, because if you break your femur, it really hurts. That's the most painful bone in the body to break." But so we have this picture, then we have the picture of the guy getting hit and eyes lighting up going, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. Yeah. But you're also a PhD student. Like you're not some run into the wall head first kind of guy. I mean, you're a smart guy, and education is a big part of your family too, right? So how do you reconcile those two parts of Chuck Aoki?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I ask myself that sometimes. Because literally I'll have been like on Sunday be smacking into people knocking around, and the next day I'm just at my laptop just quietly typing, and it's like, it's really like, does this happen? Like I've had this moment of sort of incongruousness that's a bit odd. I think at its core, and this will sound a little pretentious, I'm just a very curious person. I've always just loved to learn. I've always loved to read. I've always loved to find out new things. I like to learn about most random things, and then when I find something, I want to learn the most I can about it. I've just always been a curious person. But I think I've also been I also have never wanted to be defined solely by one thing. I love rugby. I love playing for Team USA. I love getting to do it. It's one of the greatest honors of my life. It's been amazing. It brought me so many places. But I also know that Father Time is undefeated. So someday I will not be able to compete anymore. And like you said, I also want to have other things in my life. I want to have balance. I want to be able to do things. The physical side, I love it. I love training. I love working hard. But I also like stretching my brain and having to think through complex problems and solve challenges. And I see it as a responsibility to a certain extent also to know what's going on in the world and kind of be able to contribute in some way. I think that sport can do that in a lot of ways. I think we can be ambassadors of a lot of different things that are important and impactful. But I also think it's important to recognize that there's a whole world outside of sport, and that we need to understand what's going on and be informed about, and really be prepared to carry on when the curtain finally comes down and I can't compete anymore. So I think for me, at its core, like I said, I'm a curious person, but it's also just about balance. It's about having. I like to have, for every person I smack, I gotta have a new fact I learned. I don't know. I always like to have a couple of different things going in my life.
So PhD candidate at Denver University in international relations and comparative politics. What are your conversations like with your teammates?
At school or on the rugby team?
On the rugby team.
Oh, the rugby, yeah. We talk about all kinds of stuff. We really do. Some of these guys are my closest friends. We've been teammates for the better part of a decade. And so we talk rugby, of course. We talk strategy, and it's actually really funny to kind of reflect on, because when I first was on the team, this is, like I said, 10 years ago. We're all in our early 20s. We're talking about going out and party, all just as classic, young guy stuff. And now a bunch of them have kids. I'm getting married this year. Other guys are getting married. So now it's like, oh, what do you think about home refinancing? It's like, oh, well, no, you got to do it this way. You got to do it that way. It's this kind of fun thing to see, like, oh, we're growing up. We're getting old, but. At our core, we're sports guys. We talk about sports. I'm trying to get everyone on the team hooked into F1, because that's my latest obsession, is Formula One racing.
Okay.
But we hang out. What's so cool, why I love being a part of team sports, is that you get so close to people. You spend so much time together. You go through it together. I've been through some of the toughest days in my career, with those guys, and where it was just awful, where we hated it. We're like, this sucks. We lost. We suck. We're the worst players in the world. And, when you go through those things and come out on the other side of them, and you're still friends, you're still buddies, that's just what's so special to me, is getting to share that with these people who are working as hard as I am, who've gone through the same stuff I am. It's a really amazing thing to get to be a part of. And, like I said, we run the gamut, but it certainly is. It's something I just, like I said, I love it. I love getting to be part of the team.
How much does your PhD side end up with the rugby players, and how much does your rugby side end up with the PhD candidates?
That's a good question. So I would say I've had to pick and choose my spots with the rugby team, because I have this tendency to talk a lot. I can go on and on and on, and you've noticed that. But I've learned this with people in my life. They get this look where they kind of glaze over, and they're polite. They don't want to tell me to shut up, but it's like, you can tell, like, okay, I've gone too far. I should back off. So I pick and choose my spots. I try to, if people want to talk, guys will ask me questions. Oh yeah, sure, happy to talk about it. But I try to avoid the, hey, did you see this thing? And I can just, like I said, I can see the glaze come on. It's like, okay, I'll just move on, go to a different world. But it's funny with my school, because I also did my master's degree while I was on the team. And I remember the first time, I said, oh yeah, I played with rugby, and just kind of did nothing about it. And I came back to class the first day after Rio, and the professor looks at me and goes, why didn't you tell me? I was like, why didn't I tell you what? He's like, you're really good. I was like, oh, I don't know. I said I was on Team USA. He's like, no, but you didn't say you score all the points. I was, well, I don't score all the points. And, it just gives me so it's like, I try to, I try not to come in and big time it, but I try to, I just talk about it. And I think that folks are always really interested and want to hear about it. So it's a very fun thing I get to do. And like you said, it's kind of incongruous. It sometimes feels very different than the world I'm in, but I really enjoy getting to straddle those two worlds. And as cheesy as it might sound, I actually have found that I can bring some things. I think both worlds are some crossovers. Like there's some interesting things that come together, whether it's, in the PhD program, you have to learn to think really critically. I think that's helped my ability to strategize and be thoughtful player. I think that I think, like you said, working together is the core of team sports. I think that's really helped me work together and find make good relationships in my program.
And understand the roles that different people are playing probably as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Kind of knowing finding where you fit into it and sort of fitting into that place and being able to operate successfully. Yeah, for sure.
It's really interesting. So your field of PhD, I mean, your future field is interesting to me in some ways, because looking at, you've done 3 games now, 3 Paralympic games, and then other world championships for the US.
Mm-hmm.
But you had great grandparents, you're of Japanese descent, you had great grandparents who were in internment camps here in the US. So your pride in representing your country, how does your pride in your country, how do you look at what happened with your grandparents and maintain that same sense of pride in your country? And did it affect what you're doing?
Yeah, I think I do think that I've always had I've tried to take a worldly view to things. I think the US is a wonderful place to live, but I reckon we're one country in this world. We're part of a much bigger globe. And I think, maybe you can think this as well. I think going to the Paralympics is really what drove that home for me. It's like, whoa, I am part of a small part of a much larger operation. There is so much else going on in this world. And so I think that's part of what's driven my study. I think though, to your initial question about, how you can kind of represent a country with pride, even though it's really been harmful, in some ways, I think the most patriotic thing you can do for your country is always challenge it to be better, to be the best thing you can possibly be. And so I think that when I agree with things, I say it. I think, like I said, I think Team USA has been wonderful. I'm being part of Paralympians and including us and all things, I think it's been wonderful. But when things need to be called out, I'll call it out. I'll say, hey, this is not cool. Like, you can't do this. I remember just when we went to the White House earlier this year, the Washington Post put out a headline and it said Olympians descend on the White House and the whole story. And if you read the headline of the story, you wouldn't know Paralympians were even there. You would have had no clue they were even there. And I tweeted about it. I said, hey, what the hell? This is not cool. And to their credit, they changed the headline, and it's in there, and so you got updated. But it's like it's always, to me, it's about this is where I'm from, this is my home, and home is always a very special place. But it's also our duty to push to be better, to speak up for things you believe in, and to agitate for the change that you want to see in the world, and I think what I've always found so fascinating about my grandparents is that my great grandparents and my grandfather and grandmother were in the internment camps, and lots of great uncles and things like that as well. But right after my grandfather was released, he joined the Army Reserves. Like he signed up to sort of help serve the country that had treated him so poorly. And so I think that's also really notable. Unfortunately, he passed away, so when I was quite young, so never had a chance to ask him about it. But to me, it was really the sign of, a lot of things went into it, I'm sure, but forgiveness, the ability to say, you know what, you treated me poorly, but I still want it. Like they immigrated here. They wanted to live in this country. They wanted to be a part of it. And so the ability to forgive is a powerful lesson that I've always tried to take from that, is that, things will go wrong and we should stand up for things that go wrong, but we also have to find ways to move forward in our lives. We have to find ways to be successful and to continue to move forward, even when we get sort of treated really unfairly and awful.
Well, it's easy to be on the outside looking in too, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about something that's on the racial side here,
Yeah.
but also on the disability side, to be on the outside looking in. Is that part of what attracts you to sport and attracts you to sport on the highest level?
Yeah, I would say so. Absolutely. I think, I always say that I identify as a person with disability first and foremost. That's really my biggest identity. That's the biggest thing that is a part of my life. It's something that I really don't know a life outside of being disabled. Like there was very little, but other than that, I don't really identify much outside of that. And so, yeah, I think a big part of why I try to be, an active member and talk about Paralympics, all these things, is to increase, awareness of disability, that people can be successful. Disability is just sort of, it's a part of who we are, but it's something that does not limit you, and you can really do a lot of incredible, successful things. And it's important to talk about that and to show that to society to help to improve it, because it's certainly something that drives me to want to be something, because like I said, I was 10 or 11 when I met Paul Schulte for the first time, and I'd never seen any Paralympic sport. I didn't know anyone. After him, I didn't really know who I could go look for. And I don't need people to look up to me. They can look up to Tatiana McFadden or Nick Mayhew or Declan Farmer or Tyler Carter. I could go on and on. They don't have to look up to me. They can if they want to. But it's like all these people elevating all these incredible athletes is something that I really want to do, because I think that I want the next generation of Paralympic athletes in the United States to be able to say, hey, I wanted to be like so and so. I want to be like so and so. I think that's just incredible. They're important.
Well, athletes are a small percentage as well, right? The International Paralympic Committee has their We Are the 15 right now, which is talking about 15% of the population, 1.2 billion people in the world with physical disabilities. How much do you share in common with that 15% of the population?
It's a good question. I certainly think that I have some advantages that they don't have. First of all, I live in a country that does fairly well for people with disabilities. We can obviously do a lot better, but I think on the scale of it, we do fairly well here. I've been a successful athlete, which has helped, and I have a very supportive family and things like that. But at the same time, I think that I still can relate a lot to disability experience. When I go out in public, I'm just another person in a wheelchair. I'm just still kind of having to navigate the same issue when I get to a place and there's a bunch of steps. It's like, well, how do I get it? It's like, oh, well, you got to go around back and go through the kitchen. I certainly feel as though I've got a lot of relations to that, and I understand the disability experience. It was only a few years ago, I was just going to a grocery store one time, literally just walking to the grocery store, and this guy, as I'm walking, kind of is talking to his friend and pointing, he goes, well, at least I'm not like him, and so it's kind of like, well, all right, first of all, you can only wish to be like me, sir. But it's still just, I think I still very much know how people with disabilities are viewed by society. And I've been viewed that way. People have looked at me and sort of said, oh, this person can't do this, they can't do that, the infantilization of it, that always needs help, the constant thing of that. So while, like I said, I certainly think that I have some advantages that other people don't have, I try really hard to make sure I understand what everyone goes through. Part of my role is I sit on the Athlete Advisory Council for the US Paralympic Committee, and where we really advocate on behalf of athletes. So I try to understand, and people with disabilities really broadly, try to understand the depth of experiences and the amount of things we do, and whether it's and then going into corporate places and speaking about disability inclusion, how you can do this is something that, like I said, I really try to be on the forefront of, because if I'm to be the first person they've interacted with disability, I want to leave a good impression and kind of help orient them in a positive direction.
You mentioned a couple of things that were really interesting there, and one is sort of the accessibility part of it, right? Is getting around, just having access. This is an ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act issue, is having access to places. And I tell people all the time, and you probably say the same thing, I don't encounter much of anything on a daily basis that I can't do. I go to a lot of the same places, probably. Mm-hmm. My house is set up. I don't have too many issues, but the perception is something that is a little bit different. And you are a guy who's in two entirely different worlds, where you're in the sport world, But then in the education world, have you seen perception rear its ugly head in the academic world?
I have been very lucky that I have not seen it too much. However, I have several friends who have different types of disabilities who have absolutely dealt with it, whether it's dealing with accommodations and like, hey, this is something that I need in my life. And them saying, well, do you really need this? It's like, well, yeah, I'm not asking for it just for fun, And so I think one of those real challenges that I'm trying to learn more about as a visibly disabled person is what it's like people with invisible disabilities, because that's a really big, challenging topic that, I think what helps, so to speak, for me is when I come into a room, it's like, oh, he's in a wheelchair. We got to make sure we have a ramp, stairs, help reaching. No one really, if I'm at a store and I say, hey, can you reach that for me? I've never had anyone go like, no, get it yourself. There's people are willing to do that, but I think there's a lot of folks who have things that don't present that way, but need extra help with things, and they face a lot of pushback sometimes. So, like I said, I've been lucky that I think I've had nothing but really accommodating people who've been helpful. But the perception that you always need help still exists. And, I'm not going to lie, sometimes it's nice to have help. It's like, yeah, you know what? You can help me get that. I'd be happy to have you carry my plate. That will be fine. And so it's trying to balance that with not leading to a perception that people always need help. We always need help. And so I try to set really, really good boundaries and also explain to folks. And I talk like, look, when I tell you what I need is my experience. That is what I need. That's what I'm asking for. You cannot generalize my experience to basically anyone else in this world. You just can't. I think that's what's so tough for people is we want to have easy. Oh, this person comes in, we do this. The person like this comes in, we do this. And with disability, it's just not the case. You have to have a really bespoke. Bespoke is probably too fancy word. You have to be very flexible. That's right. I always lead off with. You have to have a flexible way of dealing with it. And like I said, I think I've been a good advocate for myself, which I think helps a lot. And something I encourage other disabled folks to do is to say, look, it's not going to be fair. There's going to be times where people, don't want to do this. You have to find a way to advocate for yourself, and there's a give and take. It's like you shouldn't have to beg for things you need, but you also have to know how to convey things in a way that can be effective. I think that's really important.
Well, this also started for you when you were a young kid. So you might not have had those same skills as a young kid that you have now. You've a lot of experience. How did you evolve in your ability to speak for yourself, to represent a greater population, but also to understand what other people were going through when they were asking you a question and might not have the right words for it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you're completely right. When I was a kid, I was not the confident person I was now. My fiance always tells me, "Oh, I'm sure you were good in high school." No, I was shy. I didn't want to talk to you. I did not develop this confidence. And I think, I really give a lot of the credit to my parents. My mom would take me to doctor's appointments. And, when I was really young, she wouldn't make me have to say things. When I got older, I was like, hey, you need to be talking. You need to be telling them what you need, because they're not just gonna hand it to you, And I also got to see her as a role model, especially when I was doing school accommodation stuff when I was younger, really advocating for me and being able to say, this is what he needs, this is why he needs it, this is how we'd like to do it, and there's pushback for that. So I think her as a role model was extremely helpful for me in sort of understanding how to go about that and what the ways are to do. And so I cannot thank her enough. But I think the other part is that there was also some failings. There were times when I started undergrad where I was like, I needed help, and I just was like, I'm just not going to ask for it. Oh, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it. And that led to problems. That led to me not doing very well my first couple semesters. And I'm relatively smart, but I failed a class. And it was like, that was kind of a wake up call. Like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, you are better than this, And so I think, it wasn't rock bottom or anything like that, but sometimes that's what you have to go through. You have to kind of get knocked down to be able to realize that you can get up and stand up and keep going, or sit up or whatever. And so I think that's been something I've worked hard to do, and it's certainly a skill that I have to practice every day. There's still times today where I'm entering a situation where I'm like, oh, should I say it? It's like, oh, maybe not. You hesitate, because it can be tiring always advocating for yourself. But I think I do think that I'm good at it. I think I can be persuasive and forceful when need be. And I think that's something why I've tried to become an advocate to the best of my ability to help people, because I know for some folks, it's not a comfortable thing to do. It's not something they want to do. And, if I can be that person to be able to stand up and say, hey, no, this is not okay. We need to do it this way, and be that voice for people. I want to be that. And I want to help people who don't feel that way. And then to your sort of final question, sort of about how you deal with folks who maybe don't use the right language, don't say things quite properly, is something that I've tried to do in my life. And you can't always apply this, is to assume good intent, though. I think most people are trying to be good. They're trying to say the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing, and they mess it up. And so not immediately jumping down someone's throat. How dare you say that? How dare you use that word? It's like, well, actually, I understand what you're trying to say. That's not really how we talk about it. That's not appropriate. That's not appropriate conversation and educating. And I would say 95% of the time, people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Thank you for educating me. And there's not a problem, and then obviously there's times when people get flustered, which is why I think I try to stand up. I try to be the one to talk, because I'm not afraid. I won't back down to somebody. But I do think that assuming good intent is really important, especially when it's something a person hasn't encountered before. If a person has never met a person in a wheelchair before, how can you expect them to just instantly know exactly what they should do and behave? I think that's a little unfair to that person as well.
And if you come right back at them in a super combative kind of way, they're never going to be able to approach somebody in a meaningful manner.
Exactly.
How, for you now, you've got a lot on your plate. I mean, you're an advocate, you're a student, you're an athlete. How are you balancing all of this? And especially now, like looking at, you've got world championships coming up. I'm assuming you're looking at Paris in 2024. How are you balancing all of what you're doing? Because you're going to have to write a thesis. You're going to have to defend your thesis. I hope I'm not making you nervous at this point.
No. First off, good question. If I knew the exact answer, I would probably write a book about that, sell that, and not worry about any of the rest.
Make a lot of money. Yeah.
I think it's always a little bit of trade-off sometimes. First of all, I would say I don't have a ton of a social life, which is, unfortunate, but it's okay. I have my fiance who's wonderful, and she supports me. No, I think what it is for me is it's about prioritizing different things at different times. So there's times where, it's like, what, I got to be just grinding away on this research or this paper, whatever. I'm just going to grind, and I don't lose track of my training, because obviously elite athletics, you can't lose track of it. I'm going to grind away on these things. And then other times, what, this is a little down. I can set this aside and I can move to this next thing. And so I think being able to focus and being able to compartmentalize a little bit is really helpful, because, if I'm sitting there trying to work and all I can think about is how I need to be training, I'm not going to do good work. And if I'm training and all I can think about is, oh God, I need to be writing something, that's not going to work either. So being able to sort of enter into these headspaces, and it's something we do competitively, actually. They talk a lot about when you're on the court, you're in the zone, you're locked in. When you go down the hill, you were locked in, right? And so it's like being able to do that. It's like, okay, when I'm on my laptop working, I'm doing that. And that's what I'm doing. When I'm out training, that's what I'm doing. And, sometimes it means taking an extra 5 minutes to recenter and to totally break, like, playing on my phone for doing a crossword puzzle for 10 minutes, like, and just totally checking out whatever, playing video games, just having those little breaks, I think is helpful. So that when I do focus, I'm able to just lock it and focus. I think that's my biggest challenge often is really not just bouncing from thing to thing to thing constantly. It's like, no, do this. It's really kind of being able to do it in a sequential manner. And then, like I said, sort of triaging based on what is most important on that day.
Which, I mean, you've hit on a lot of really important things there. I mean, triaging on what's most important, having your priorities down is something that is so important. And it's so easy in this world to just be following whatever, you're an email dings, this happens, that happens, and losing your focus. And they've talked about how then you have to come back and refocus. And I think we have this bit of a fantasy that you can just bounce from this to this and multitask and do everything and be perfectly fine at it.
Yeah.
But it's a skill. It's a skill, this idea of focus and creating that focus.
Mm-hmm.
Have you always been good at it, or did you have to develop skills?
I think I think I was always not bad at being able to, when I'm working on something, being able to focus. But when I was younger, I didn't have as much going on. Now that I have more going on, I've had to really, like I said, develop ways of focus on one thing, break, move to the next thing. So it's I'm not perfect at it. I shouldn't sit here and be like, oh yeah, I've got this figured out. It's easy peasy. It's like, no, I still work on this every day. I still struggle every day. It's like, oh, I didn't really do the work I should have done, but that's okay. I actually, I should say, I think that's the most important part in some ways, is being able to be satisfied with what you did on a given day. And even if it wasn't perfect, saying that's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow's going to be a better day or a good day or whatever. I actually think that's a really key skill, is not lingering on what didn't happen that day or what you should have done that day. Because guess what? When you're in bed at 11 at night, you're not getting up to do 6 more hours of work. You got to go to bed. You go to sleep. We have so much research now on how critical sleep is, that it's being able to find that. So I think that it's an ongoing process. It's something that I like I said, I hope I'm getting better at it. I think I have, but it's something that I don't think I'll ever be perfect at. It's always just every day is a new challenge, but that's kind of what makes it fun. It's what's today? What am I going to work on today? What's going to be the challenge today? What am I going to have to work through today? And I as a competitive person, I think that helps when I approach it that way too, to a certain extent.
Yeah, and sometimes the focus is really the first part of the competition.
Yeah.
The personal competition. It's like, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I've got to prioritize, and then I've got to focus on what I'm doing, because those are often, for me, those are the days that feel the least fulfilling, right? Where I've been all over the place, and what did you do? And I'm like, I don't know. I was doing stuff all day long.
Exactly.
But I don't know what I really did. And you get those endorphins.
You do. Yeah.
When you are focused. So this is like your workout, where you get in and you focus and you go, oh, okay, that is good. I'm getting paid back for the work that I did. We've got like 5 minutes left. What do things look like for you moving forward now with World Championships? And I did mention Paris. Is Paris something that is a consideration? That's 2024.
So so the World Championships coming up in October, so just a couple months away. So we're really in that kind of that grind time now, where I always think you can still make a little bit of extra progress in that last little bit. You're not going to make a total transformation of your body, but you can get those last couple edges and percent. So kind of grinding out those last few months of training for that. And I'm hoping to do Paris. That's you gonna say?
Well, no, and I'm asking about World Championships, and I didn't mention something because you were really sick.
Oh yeah,
going into Tokyo, so you performed well, but you had infections. 5 surgeries on your knee. I mean, this is like, you were tortured effectively going into Tokyo.
It was horrible. I spent I spent about a month. I spent pretty much the entire month of February of that year in the hospital, just because they couldn't figure out what was going on. And it wasn't until March where they finally went in, and the surgeon actually ended up essentially taking my knee out. So I basically had no knee when I was competing. But it was actually really funny. He put in these cement things. They're not. He was like, "Do you think they'll break?" No, they shouldn't break. He was like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "This is a sport I play." He's like, "Yeah, it should be fine." And so, so I had no knee. It was horrible, but I got healthy in time, and I trained about as hard as I'd ever trained for a few months, and was able to get back and do at least okay, which worked out well. And then the follow up to the knee thing, though, is when I went to get it cleaned out and fixed up. He goes, went in the surgery. I woke up and he came to me. He's like, yeah, they broke. I had to. I was like, I tried to say. He's like, I didn't think it would break. He's like, I've never seen them break. I was like, well, most people who you do this to are not going out and crashing into people. They're just like, old people who are walking around. So it was that was funny. But so it was a heck of a 2021 to start, but it got a lot better by the end of it, thankfully. But it certainly was rough for a little while there. So World Championships this year.
And you'll be healthy.
Yeah, and I've been healthy for a long time. So just knock on wood, I'll keep being healthy. But yes, we have that, and then Paris is the target. I think it was when it came down to it, it was like, it's actually not that much longer, and I think I can stay physically fit to do it. Obviously, I have to work hard, and we've got a lot of young talent in the country coming up, which is very exciting. And of course means that I have to keep working hard, which is good, I guess. So Paris is the target, and then we're gonna do Worlds, gonna do Paris, and then we will just we will see where the world takes us after that.
And have you decided on a subject for your thesis?
I'm really interested, and I won't nerd out too much. I'm really interested in data and how the way big data sets affect the way we perceive the world, and how data kind of is transforming the way we think about the world and democracy. And so I have to get a little more specific than that, but that's what I'm really interested in, sort of how these massive data sets were, like, these companies have all this information, and it's like, we should have the right to our data. It's like, well, as one person, that doesn't actually mean that much, but when you put 50 million people together, that's worth a lot. And so how do we kind of balance and reconcile that? That challenge, as I think, as we move into this new world where everything is electronic, all this data is available to everybody, and companies like Google make billions of dollars just by selling targeted ads based on the information they hold about you. I think it's really interesting, and something that, like I said, I have to figure out exactly where to settle on, but that's what the topic that fascinates me a lot.
It sounds like a great topic. It really does, and something that can give us a greater understanding, and in a variety of different ways, right? Interpreting the data using a 35,000 foot view or whatever, as opposed to sort of being down and going, oh, that one thing that means this, or this means that, or whatever. But also just who's collecting the data, right? I mean, at one point it was like on some of this like climate stuff and everything, it was like NOAA was one of the places where you're getting the most data. And are you able to get in and utilize that data and interpret it, because the interpretation is going to be the really important part. So
yeah,
Chuck,
no, exactly.
Absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, for doing amazing things and continuing to do amazing things. We'll look forward to seeing you both on the court, and whether we get a chance to read the thesis or not. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a book, or we don't want to get too far ahead, but we'll let you let us know when things come around.
There we go. Perfect. Well, Chris, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. It's a lot of fun to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Chuck, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks to all of you. Really appreciate you tuning in. We hope that you've enjoyed it. As we always say, the greatest gift you can give us is to tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in. This will be a traditional podcast as well. Look out for it. And if you do see it, please follow us, please like us, and we'll continue to give you great content. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. Take care.